Daniel King doesn't really seem to know anything, does he? He parrots other apologists, but he doesn't seem capable of having any intelligent thoughts on his own. We're going to see that again today. I doubt anyone came here expecting Danny Boy to have a rational point, because I think we're all in agreement that it just isn't possible for him to have anything intelligent going on in his head. So don't say I didn't warn you. Let's get started. Welcome to Daniel King's take on the moral argument, which I figure pretty much everybody expects is going to be really, really stupid. But then again, what else can we expect, given what we've seen so far? Once again, we're going to be doing a two-parter, which I guess has become more common of late because there's just been so much dumb to respond to. The supercut will be out sooner or later if you just want to see it all in one sitting. But I figure there's only so much Daniel King that we can tolerate at once. So, does morality prove that God exists? No. No, it does not. It just proves how dumb the religious really are. So let's get at it.
Morality is proof God is real.
Yeah, it's not. Because the religious don't seem to understand what morality is. Granted, they don't seem to understand what reality is, but I'm sure we'll get into both of those as we go on. Daniel King has absolutely no clue about anything, but we've gone through, 15 videos of him being completely ignorant so far, so let's let him get his waddle on and we'll come back and take this whole mess apart.
Premise A, if God does not exist, objective moral values do not exist.
Alright, to start this off, this whole thing is just a mess. This is a bullshit premise. So let's do this in reverse. Objective moral values aren't real. There is no such thing as defensible objective morality. I know a lot of people like to think that there is, but they have not been able to defend it in any rational way that I've seen. It's just, but I really want it to be true. But that doesn't matter. Secondly, though, this just assumes that only the Christian God could account for objective moral values, and I'm pretty sure that other religions would like a word. Yet this is exactly how most religions tend to work, right? Well, of course our gods are real. Says who? How do you prove it? Because most religions out there are doing the exact same thing. Hindus think that their pantheon is real, while rejecting the idea of the Christian God. Muslims insist that Allah is real, while insisting that the Hindu gods aren't there. It's a whole bunch of people making a whole bunch of unjustified proclamations and not having any way to back any of it up. So premise A fails twice over. Let's keep going, though.
Premise B, objective moral values do exist.
Says who? This is just a claim, presented because it just so happens to appeal to Daniel King, not because there's any kind of defensible evidence that it's actually true. But I really like the idea. Doesn't mean anything. And I've run into Christians who have told me, well, I just wouldn't want to live in a world where objective morality wasn't real. Okay, big deal. I don't want to live in a world where adults have imaginary friends, but there you go. You don't have a choice of the kind of world that you live in. You just live there. So unless he's going to present a long, detailed argument for why objective morals actually exist beyond, but it feels good, I figure this premise is going to fail too. Granted, we'll have to see, but this is Daniel King we're talking about, and we all know he's just not that smart.
Conclusion, therefore, God exists.
And there you go. It just peters out like a fart. This is like a lot of religious arguments, where they're just trying to define their God into existence. They are starting off with the conclusion, for which they have absolutely no evidence, and then just working backwards. Well, I believe in objective morals, and I believe they come from God, so we'll just fill those in and call it a day. Except it doesn't work that way. You haven't proven a God, which you have to do, and you haven't proven objective morality is real, which you have to do, and you don't get to have your conclusion without doing both of those things up front. Now, I suppose it's possible that King will come up with an amazing argument for the existence of objective morality, something beyond, but I really want it to be real. But, as I said, this is Daniel King we're talking about here, and I'm just waiting for the first time he's going to stumble over his own feet. I figure that can't be too long. What do you think?
Imagine living in a world where there was no right or wrong. Someone could kill your loved ones, but because there's no right or wrong, they would not be considered guilty of murder.
But there have been times and places where that has been effectively true. There have been countries where force of law has effectively broken down. You get chaos, which is why most countries with active governments don't let that happen. If you go back and look at places like the Republic of Congo right now, that's pretty much what's going on. There have been more than 6 million deaths since 1996, and that came in the wake of the 1994 Rwandan genocide, where ethnic Hutu extremists killed an estimated 1 million ethnic minority Tutsis. The whole thing is a mess, and pretty much anybody who kills anybody on the other side, they get away with it, at least until the other side rises up and kills them right back. This is why people like Daniel King make such fools of themselves, because he spends so much time with his nose in a book of mythology that he doesn't realize that he actually lives in a world where, at least in some places, that's exactly what happens.
You could walk into the nearest jewelry store, smash the glass, and fill your gym bag with diamonds.
You haven't looked at the crime statistics in a lot of big cities, have you? Go to LA and walk through the Diamond District. There are bars on everything, at least when the businesses aren't open. Then they just have armed guards. Why? Because if they didn't take extreme precautions, people would do exactly that. No, it isn't legal, but it still happens all the time. According to the Public Policy Institute of California, violent crime rose by 6% in 2021 alone. Of all violent crimes, 67% of those reported were aggravated assaults. Now, those were still relatively low. Violent crimes have been falling across the country since about 1992, but it still happens. If there was an objective morality that God just shoved into everyone's hearts, then why would people be committing all of these crimes? Oh right, they just want to sin. It's a convenient excuse to get from the pie-in-the-sky fantasy that they want to believe to the reality that they actually have to deal with.
Or a husband coming home from a tough day at work could slap his wife and abuse his children, but you wouldn't be able to call the police about it because abuse wouldn't be wrong.
There's a difference between being wrong and being illegal. Wrong is subjective. Illegal is objective. There are laws on the books to control people's behavior, or at the very least to punish people who cross that line. This is something that society comes up with, not your magical father figure in the sky. Because again, if there was an objective morality, then there wouldn't be more than 300,000 rapes in the US every single year, would there? Because what he's really doing here is the same thing that I criticized recently, in a video on the UN Human Rights Declaration. You can declare anything you want, but unless you can hold people accountable, it doesn't really mean a whole lot, does it? Saying, well, God impressed these moral virtues on your heart, but you're free to ignore them at a whim, although God's going to punish you after you die. That doesn't actually mean anything. It's an empty threat at best, because you can't prove that any of it ever happens. This is why the whole thing is so stupid. It is all entirely empty.
In a world without morality, a terrorist could kill hundreds of people, A modern day Hitler could commit a new Holocaust. Racism would be okay. Misogyny wouldn't be condemned. Corruption in government would be just fine. And it wouldn't be bad to take away someone's freedom.
We have all that stuff, and we do have morality. What you talking about, Willis? Because the world that we should expect to see, if any of this God crap was real, is not the world that we actually see. We know that all of those things happen. Why? Because whether anyone likes it or not, some people, some groups, they simply are above the law. Not in any official capacity, of course, but in practice, there are people who can pretty much get away with murder and almost certainly do get away with it. That is with human morals and human laws. What should we expect with a divine moral command? Certainly not what we see. There should be no criminals because everyone should be forced to follow God's commandments. Of course, they just have to come up with excuses for why the real world doesn't match their magical happy land in their heads. So they just make up sins and point to free will as a way to get around all the implications that ought to exist if any of their claims were true. They're just not, though. This is not defensible, not in any demonstrable way. They really want it to be true, but that doesn't make it true, and we don't have to listen to their empty claims and take any of it seriously. They have to be able to back it up, and the religious never can.
I don't know about you, but I wouldn't want to live in a world where there's no right or wrong.
Who cares what you want? You live in the world that you live in. What you want is entirely irrelevant. This is one of the biggest problems with the religious, though, isn't it? They are just emotional children. They are throwing a temper tantrum, screaming and crying because they just aren't getting their way, while just making up a more comforting fantasy realm in their heads because that's what they really wish was true. Well, too bad. You don't get to do that and maintain any credibility. You just look stupid. Knock it off.
Thankfully, I don't have to. Right and wrong exist, and the conscience of everyone in the world is proof of this fact.
No, because that simply isn't the case. Did you ever hear of sociopaths? They have no concept of right and wrong. These are people who are amoral. And in fact, there are a lot of people out there who don't have anything wrong with their brains, who still don't believe in right and wrong. These people are moral nihilists. They will have to live as if there was a right and wrong, or more properly, a legal and illegal, because if not, they would just get put in prison or face financial fines, but they still have to pretend that they believe it, even though they don't. But that doesn't mean that they agree with the law. They just don't have a choice. The law isn't always right, and people don't always agree. The whole thing is entirely subjective.
Have you ever felt that you were treated unjustly? Perhaps someone broke a promise they made to you, or perhaps they cheated you in some way and stole from you. Perhaps they told a lie about you or broke your trust in some other way. Perhaps they were violent to you and physically hurt you. How did that make you feel?
What does that have to do with anything? I mean, sure, lots of those things happen to people every single day. What does your emotional reaction have to do with anything? Because remember, his entire premise, or at least the premise of the moral argument, is that his imaginary friend creates a universal moral system that applies equally to everybody automatically, no exceptions. So how does the fact that someone might do something that hurts your feelings fit in with that particular view? In fact, it seems to fit in a lot more with the idea that morality is entirely subjective, that different people and different cultures have different moral expectations, and thus different things are acceptable or not acceptable in each. I'm still waiting for him to actually prove his assertion that there is, in fact, an objective morality. Why do I figure we're going to be disappointed? Because nobody is more disappointing than Daniel King.
When such things happen to us, or we see them happen to someone else, we know that those things are wrong and they should not happen.
No, we don't want them to happen to us, so through empathy and enlightened self-interest, we conclude that we shouldn't want them to happen to others either. That doesn't always hold true either. Because here's the thing. If I saw a Catholic priest who had been caught molesting little kids, and that happens a lot, I'm pretty much on board with anything happening to that asshole that can conceivably happen. Put him in an arena with angry parents with pitchforks. That would be fine. Put it on pay-per-view. I'm totally fine with that. There is nothing wrong with beating the crap out of an abuser, at least as far as I'm concerned. If the police want to look the other way for a while, maybe go out for donuts, hey, I'm good with that. And I think most people would agree.
In the same way that we know what is wrong, we also know what is right. It is right to be kind to people. It is right to be honest and sincere. It is right to be patient and generous.
Then why are so many people none of those things? Because we all have to go right back to the initial claim that God created this universal morality and put it in everyone's hearts. Then why are there so many Christians, not just people, but actual Christians, doing all of those things every single day? I mean, lying for the Lord is a time-honored tradition among the religious. Why did Jim Bakker commit fraud and spend 5 years in a federal prison? Yet, when he got out, he went right back to scamming people for the Lord. Why do so many preachers get caught with their hands in the cookie jar or other places? You'd think these people ought to know better, but demonstrably they don't. It's why we point to the FBI prison entry statistics so often, where the religious are dramatically overrepresented versus their numbers in the wild, while atheists are dramatically underrepresented. Why does it work that way? I don't know. You tell me.
No one needs a law to tell them that patience or generosity or kindness are right. We know that these kind of actions are right.
Not so much. Now he's just talking about vague generalities, but there are a lot of people who absolutely do need to be told these things. They do not understand this on their own or of their own accord. That's why we have a lot of laws on the books. You wouldn't think that we'd have to tell people not to do so. I mean, in Alabama, for instance, it is illegal to drive blindfolded. Now, who in their right mind needs to be told that? Now, there's all kinds of really stupid laws out there, as we all know. You can see tons of videos on YouTube about them. Go look, you can find them. But they are still on the books, and at one time, somebody thought that was a good idea. You're not allowed to put a donkey in a bathtub in Arizona. There was a good reason for it once upon a time, but why make a law about it? I could go on and on and on and on, but I think you get the idea. People are generally stupid and will do stupid things if somebody doesn't force them not to. I mean, just look at the religious.
We know right from wrong, not just by how it makes us feel when we're treated rightly or wrongly, but also because of what we experience when we treat someone else rightly or wrongly.
Because of empathy and enlightened self-interest. See, this is why I find these people so ludicrous. I'd love to have someone from another country at hand for some of these discussions. I'd love to be able to march somebody out from, I don't know, Saudi Arabia or North Korea or some of the backwards countries in Africa. Just trot them out and have them argue morality with Daniel King. Because their views on morality and our views on morality, they are very, very, very different. In some places in the Middle East, throwing gay people off of roofs, that's perfectly fine. Honor killings are perfectly fine. In fact, it's immoral not to. King would scream, "Well, you're being immoral." And they just scream, "Well, you're being immoral back." And nothing would ever get done. In some places in Africa, it is entirely fine to slap a gun into a kid's hand and just send them out to get shot. That would never fly here because morals are not universal. And Daniel doesn't get that. Most people don't. It's why most of these moral crusaders live in a religious echo chamber, where everyone they encounter thinks just like they do. They have no experience outside of their cult, and they assume that because everybody thinks like they do within their cult, well, that goes for everybody on the planet. And these people are just idiots.
Inside of every person is a moral compass.
Nope, that is absolutely untrue. The only reason that you think it's true is because you've been indoctrinated into your culture's ethical system, just like you've been indoctrinated into your religious views. Again, these people just aren't that smart. They just really like the idea, but liking the idea doesn't make it so. Anyhow, I think that we interrupted Daniel in the middle of a thought, and I guess he doesn't have a lot of those, so maybe we should just get back to it.
The conscience. The word conscience comes from joining two words together. The first word, con, means with, and the second word, science, means knowledge. So conscience means that when we do rightly or wrongly, we do it with knowledge.
Not so much. Now, you'd like to think so, but this is also coming from the kind of person who thinks that his religious beliefs are knowledge, and we all know that isn't true. So let's go look at the actual definition of conscience, which Daniel just kind of skipped past because I think he knows it wouldn't support his claims. A conscience is an inner feeling or voice viewed as acting as a guide to the rightness or wrongness of one's behaviors. In other words, it's fee-fees. It is what you've been programmed with from a time before you had any rational sense on your own. This is why the religious really want to get kids before they're smart enough to see through the nonsense. Once you get those ideas in there, it's really, really hard to get them out again.
When we knowingly do what is right, it makes us feel good. But when we knowingly do what is wrong, it makes us feel guilty.
Welcome to brain chemistry. Serotonin, dopamine, endorphins, and oxytocin, those are the chemicals produced in the brain that make you feel good when you do the things that you think you're supposed to do. But you know what? Just because you get a chemical reward for acting, that doesn't mean that you ought to have done it. Religious zealots who kill in the name of their gods, they get that chemical high too. They believe they're doing the right thing. Now, most people would disagree. Why? Because morality is entirely subjective. The Muslim who's tossing gay people off the roof or hacking off atheist heads with a machete, they're also getting a dopamine high. Are we supposed to think that that's universally morally permissible now? Because I don't think Daniel would think so. Then again, I'm really not sure that Daniel can think at all.
The difference between humans and animals is morality.
Nope, because we can demonstrate that animals, and let's be honest, we are animals, but that lots of animals also have a moral sense, likely based on the same things that we base ours on. It's just chemicals doing what chemicals do. That's all any of us actually are, after all. Big bags of mostly water and chemicals. Now, I know Daniel wouldn't like that idea, but too bad. Reality is what reality is, and Danny Boy has absolutely no grasp on reality at all.
Animals do not have a conscience.
Says who? Because that is not what the evidence says. There is an emerging consensus that some kind of rudimentary consciousness and self-awareness in some mammals, birds, and at least some cephalopod mollusks likely do have a conscience. The problem is, as I've pointed out before, is that people tend to try to anthropomorphize everything around them. They want everything to be just like they are, instead of recognizing that everything is different and needs to be evaluated on its own terms. A dog is a dog, it's not just a hairy human. It was only once researchers started to realize that they had figured out a lot of the conclusions of the past were simply incorrect, that they started to realize that dogs are actually better than they thought. Just because a dog doesn't recognize itself in a mirror, that doesn't mean that it's not self-aware. It just took other tests to prove that dogs can indeed identify themselves. It's based on smell, not visual cues. They know that they are individuals. And personally, I think that's pretty damn cool.
Sometimes a mother dog will eat her own puppies with no pain or guilt.
And you know why? Because the puppies have something wrong with them and she's just putting them out of their misery. Because they likely wouldn't survive anyhow. This is just Daniel figuring that if they're not driving cars, they can't be anything like us. And I've had a lot of experience with that kind of thing, and I will tell you that so long as animals are well cared for and healthy, then they just don't do that. Daniel's an idiot.
A female praying mantis consumes the male after mating with him.
Yep. You know why? Because it is evolutionarily advantageous for her to have a ready food supply available for her and her offspring. Now, I don't think anyone seriously thinks that a praying mantis is a self-aware agent, so Danny Boy here is just comparing apples to elephants and wondering why they're not the same thing. This is just nature being nature. There are a lot of males around, and once they've done their duty, they are no longer important. More are going to be born in 10 to 15 days, assuming warm weather. He's just trying to force his moral views onto things that just don't care. Because Daniel is, well, you know.
A lion does not feel remorse after killing a young zebra.
Why should it? That's its food source. Eat or die. Do you feel remorse after eating a hamburger? I mean, I figure he's had plenty of experience with that, don't you? I don't get the sense that Daniel King is subsisting on plant matter, do you? But even if he was, do you think he feels bad for the vegetables on his plate? It's still a living thing that he's killing. No, of course not. So if he doesn't feel bad, why should a lion? This is just how nature works. Is he really this dumb?
But if a human treats another human the way animals treat each other, we call that person a criminal.
Sure, because we have laws. We have the capacity to put our moral views into coherent form and hold others accountable. And you know who else does that? Primates of all kinds. Well, maybe not the laws bit, but if you violate the acceptable behavior standards of the group, you get ejected. See, he's clearly never done any kind of research whatsoever. Nothing that I've said can't be found in a 30-second Google search, but we all know Danny doesn't care. He's just a dumb person talking to other dumb people about dumb things that he really just wants to believe. He couldn't care less if any of it is true. He just wants to get paid.
This knowledge of right and wrong is what the German philosopher Immanuel Kant called a categorical imperative. By categorical, he meant that everyone has a category of understanding that some things are right and other things are wrong.
But we know a whole lot more today than Kant did in the 1700s. This is another instance of the religious relying on ancient thinkers because modern thinkers make them look bad. Kant didn't know as much as Danny Boy seems to think that he did. Stop living in the past. Join us for actual reality.
By imperative, he means that everyone is impelled to act upon this moral understanding. In fact, so strong is this universal moral sense that even when someone tries to ignore or erase it, the moral sense remains.
Nope. I mean, you can brainwash people into doing all kinds of things that they might have previously thought immoral. Now, that is largely a Hollywood thing, granted, but it is possible to change people's moral sense, and one of the easiest ways to do it is through damage to the brain. If someone's prefrontal cortex gets damaged, it can impair social and emotional behavior. In fact, there have been surveys, and I'll link to one down in the description, that show that a person's native revulsion to hurting others, that can be turned off by damaging specific parts of their neural topography. The ventromedial prefrontal cortex is absolutely essential to moral decision making. Researchers at Harvard have concluded, I think it's very convincing now, that there are at least two systems working when we make moral judgments. There's an emotional system that depends on this specific part of the brain, and another system that performs more utilitarian cost-benefit analyses, which in these people is clearly intact. Of course, Daniel doesn't know any of this, nor does he care. Big surprise there.
That is why we feel guilty when we do the things that we know are wrong, even if they make us feel good in the moment. That is why we still feel good when we make a right decision, even if it costs us something valuable or makes us give up a pleasure. This sense of right and wrong, of guilt and goodness, are experiences that both theists and atheists can agree on.
No, actually, I don't think so. From the religious side, They seem to think that some magical man in the sky makes you feel good or bad if you do something that this god likes or doesn't like, and that's just stupid. If you actually understand the real causes of it all, then the whole idea of a god is just laughably absurd. That's the difference. One side is dumb, the other side is not. One side is feeling, the other side is thinking. One side cares only about their fee-fees, and the other side cares only about the facts. Guess which side Daniel is on? Not the intelligent one. So anyway, that's where we're going to cut it for this moment because we're way over time. Figure next week is going to be about the same. There's a whole lot of dumb to handle in every single Daniel King video, and this one there seems to be an extraordinary amount. Yet, he's really no worse than any other apologist, is he? A bit less coherent, but the ideas are just as bad across the board. He doesn't care, though, because he's got an agenda and a wallet that is looking for money and lying to people since, let's be honest, he ought to know better. Yet the more that he opens his mouth, it's painfully clear that he doesn't. I don't think we should be expecting that to change anytime soon, do you? So until next week, let this be a lesson in critical thinking. Have some, because you can see what happens when you don't.